Welcome to another episode of the Five Senses webcast. I'm your host, Robert Zinni, and today I have local cartoonist Russ Rusty Miller here to talk about his passion, his career, but also some of his future endeavors. If you don't know his work, he's on our monthly Five Senses magazine called Stinkbug, but also he's done things like, oddly enough, Ducktales, Dick Tracy, and a lot of other things that we'll be getting into. Russ, thanks for joining us on the webcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
When I got the word that I was going to contact you about the show and interview, I was just geeking out about comics because I grew up with X-Men and definitely Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but
Right.
seeing your catalog and your experience, kind of seeing the evolution of comics, has really given me this appreciation to sit down with you today. So thank you for the opportunity.
No, absolutely.
So we have your comics here, things that you've made and then things that you were contracted for. So before we get into any of your works, I just want to know what inspired you to become a cartoonist?
That's actually a very good question, and it's got a variety of answers. The short answer, believe it or not, is fear and desperation. But then the reason I say that is because I'd been an illustrator and a designer for quite a while before I got into actually cartooning and comics. And the reason I got into that was because a lot of my other sources of income were drying up. And that happens a lot, especially when you're freelancing. You get 2 or 3 really good, steady jobs working with some magazines or something. And if they get sold, which they do often, people die. They move on to other publications. Their particular network dries up or whatever, and then you've got to go look for more work. And I never really thought I had the chops for comic books, but I found myself in a situation where I was losing so many clients, and not because of anything I did, it's just circumstances, that I started looking into it, just desperately. I've got to do something. I've got a family to feed. So I started submitting, panels and stuff to some comic books, and oddly enough, they picked me up. So that's kind of how it started. But it was really, I didn't go to it because I really didn't think I was that good, So.
So it was just kind of a random happening, but you're really good at what you do. So then,
Oh, thanks.
Who were some of the artists or cartoonists that you kind of got inspired by throughout the years?
I always liked Jack Davis. I liked Wally Wood. I liked Frank Frazetta. Everybody does. Russ Heath, Kirby, and I mean, there's just a lot of monsters out there that I looked at, which is again one of the reasons why I thought I was so, out of my league because I was looking at those. But what you don't realize is there's a lot of people in between, that you don't necessarily follow. I mean, these were like the peak individuals. These were the Michelangelos of their day or whatever. And so you're really kind of competing with them, in your head, but you're not really in reality. There's a lot of good journeyman cartoonists out there and illustrators that can, knock it out of the park week after week and pull the hours and all that good stuff, but you don't hear about them necessarily. So you think you're going to go in and just automatically be, neck to neck with, Todd McFarlane or something. So.
Okay.
So that's why it took me a while to come around.
Okay. So it took you a while to come on, and then you have some of these musings. So I kind of want to highlight Oddly Enough.
Thank you.
So how did you develop Oddly Enough with these odd facts, and how did this come about?
Okay, this is like a really kind of a natural thing for me because I like to teach, not unlike yourself. And you come across some strange information and you immediately want to share it, and that's kind of a thing most teachers do, and I really like that, and that started very, very early. And if you've got a minute, I'll actually get into how that happened. But as far as the little snippet feature, I was doing those kind of like one-offs for various publications. They'd say, well, do you have anything on like weird mammals or whatever? Oh yeah, I've got tons of that. So I'd start putting them out there, and a friend of mine says, why don't you get this syndicated? And I went, because, again, the same thing, the block with the cartoons, because they're good, I mean, syndicated features are great, So I said, okay, maybe he's right. Maybe I'm getting a direction here. So what I did was I started submitting them to all the syndication houses that I could look up, at the library. And I said, okay, I'm gonna set a goal of 100. If I get 100 rejections, I feel like it's probably not a good idea. And I got 27. So like 28th syndication house, Singer Media called me up, got a contract, and it went international for about 20 years or so. Okay, so I was pretty proud of that because syndication houses get about 3,000 submissions a year, most of them, and they buy about three.
Wow.
In a year. So that told me that somehow I managed to outgun, 290, or 2,900 and some other, professionals. So that made me pretty happy. How that started, though, weirdly, goes back to, and actually in this town, the little Carnegie Library on the corner of Gurley and Marina.
Okay.
The downstairs was the kids' library when I was growing up. So I'd go down there and look at stuff and read books and all that. But the really good stuff was upstairs. But back then, if you were a little kid, there were certain things they wouldn't let you walk out with. Okay. And I remember this one book. It was called Strange People. And of course, that was absolutely, this is where I live, man. I mean, the curiosity is just it knows no bounds. And I kept looking at this thing, and it had just bizarre stuff, behavior and, anomalies and terrible, horrible, accidents. I mean, it was just full of that stuff. And I'd take it up to the counter. They would not check it out to me. Take it up to the counter, would not check it up to me. So one day I walked up there in this darkened, hall, and I got it off the shelf again. There was somebody new on the counter, and apparently not terribly engaged in what they were doing. So boom, I got the stamp, and out I went with it. And I mean, it was just a revelation for me. So from then on, it was like that's what I pursued were these,
strange encounters,
strange, bizarre, anything,
third kind or something like that?
weird fish, volcanic strangeness, all that. I mean, just all was great.
Right, and if we look at your catalog about strangeness, right, we'll get into Stinkbug for a second, but the retro comics right here.
Oh yeah, retro 50s comics. Yep.
Yeah, this is pretty bizarre too because you encompass all of the 50s sci-fi things. So could you explain this a little bit for us?
Right. Yeah, that was another thing. I was kind of approached by a fellow that was a publisher. He worked for some pretty good sized magazines in L.A. And he said, I'd kind of like to do this comic book. What would interest you? And I said, well, I was a product of EC Comics when I was growing up. I liked Weird Science, and I liked Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and all that kind of stuff. And I said I'd really kind of like to do something that sort of looks back, an anthology, black and white's fine, good solid kind of horror stories, but like those early days. These were cautionary tales. I mean, you had people like Ray Bradbury who were writing these stories for EC Comics, so you didn't have slackers doing these tales, and they were teaching tales. Which is a lot of the movement to get them clipped was people would actually read them because if they they'd realize that the kids were actually learning morals from these stories. Okay, I know that's pretty highfalutin and very grand, but I wanted to be part of that Grand Mountain experience. So I said, what if we did something called Retro 50s Comics and just sort of harken back to that? And he said, fine, which startled me. So that's when that took off, and that was great fun till all of the comics basically imploded in the early 90s.
Right, and what I appreciate that is going back, even though I'm the kid of the 90s, on the back of the cover you can make your own bug. That's a robot.
Robots. Yeah, they all came with a different robot you could cut out and put together, and it worked. So again, harken back to the cereal boxes that you'd cut them out and put them on a string and whip them around. It would buzz or whatever.
So Russ, you've been in this business for a long, long time. We've seen your own style, but then you've been contracted to do works like Ducktales and Dick Tracy. So, what's the difference of like working on Ducktales and Dick Tracy compared to your own style?
Okay, that's a really really good question too, and I hope the answer comes up to that standard. But the deal is most of the time, especially with comics like Disney, the reason I got contracted to work with them was because I'm kind of a chameleon that way.
Okay.
And so when I knew I was kind of on the docket to audition for Disney, I didn't really know much about drawing Disney stuff. So I went out and I grabbed a couple of comic books real quick. Unbeknownst to me, the comic books that I picked up were all drawn by a man by the name of Carl Barks, who's the guy who basically invented Uncle Scrooge and the Huey, Dewey, and Louie and all. He was kind of the mastermind there. He had a very particular style with how he drew his ducks. I didn't know that, but what I started doing was practicing his style. So when I went in with audition pages, the first thing they asked me was, "Where did you get these?" And I said, "At home. I brought them in this morning." They said, "You draw just like Carl Barks." And I said, "Well, is that good?" Honestly, I didn't know. And they said, "Yeah, that's because he's kind of the dude." Okay, well, it wasn't like I'm some kind of genius. I was copying a style. All right, so that leads to things like Dick Tracy, which is a horrible style to try and replicate because Chester Gould, the guy who did them, and if his family's watching, I'm sure he's a swell guy, but. If you're trying to mimic that fellow's look, it's a nightmare because he started out as a illustrator for catalogs like Westinghouse and parts for typewriters. That's what he was drawing. So when he went into getting a comic strip, he didn't have the foundation for like anatomy and how people move and perspective and a few things like that. So to match that, you've got to sort of throw all that. If you have any kind of classical training, that's out the window because he's nowhere near it. I mean, he's not even on his way to the ballpark. He's not even in the ballpark. It's like everywhere. So to match that so that it doesn't look abrupt, you kind of have to sort of fall into his world. But it served me well that I have kind of picked up a lot of different styles. And when I first started doing comic books, if you can believe this, I was looking at Dürer, like Etchy, Adolf Dürer with this incredible cross hatching and uber hatching or whatever he did. And I was actually trying, because it's pen and ink, so I'm thinking, I've got to master that. Little did I know that it's kind of a shorthand, for reality, So big surprise. But anyway, I learned, I guess. So, eventually. So,
No, that's some good tricks for the trade. People watch from home, especially kids. Like, if you want to make it, sometimes you have to, do your research, copy the style, and then they'll be like, "Hey, you draw like that one guy."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, that was a complete fluke that happened. So, if I have a style, one thing I pride myself in is I like really clean line work. So I work really hard to keep my line work really clean. Try to use enough black to make things dynamic. Make sure that it's at least interesting. I mean, you can draw dynamic stuff that looks like reality, but it might not be interesting. You know what I mean? So one of the reasons why I think Jack Davis was so good, I mean, his anatomy was all over the map too, but it looked right and it looked jarring. And he managed to catch the moment of suspense. That's what he gives you. So and again, I don't think I'm anywhere near there. I think I'm a fairly good practitioner. And also, kids, if you're listening, I don't have a natural ability to draw. Very few people do. Really, very few people do. And I've met some, and I hate them. But here's the deal. If you have the aptitude, it's like playing an instrument or anything else. You can learn it. If you have the aptitude and drive, you can do that. But having a natural ability is actually kind of a myth. There aren't that many people that do. Really? And even if you do, okay, let's say you do. What do you do with it? That's pretty important. So great. It's kind of like being born good looking. I mean, that's great. What do you do with it? I mean,
You got to use it,
you
right?
can use it for evil. I mean, you can be sinister, and good looking.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't have a natural ability. So then, how did you decide one day that you were going to be a cartoonist?
Again, that's a really good question. I think it was just almost like I've got to do this, like a determination. I don't know what else to do. I think a lot of it has to do with I like this a lot. It's sort of like when people decide they're going to play, the trombone or something. They look at somebody playing a trombone and they think, I bet I could do that. Plus the instrument looks like it's a lot of fun. Okay. Of course, then you get into it and you realize what you've really, the road to perdition that you've gone down, but you're still going to, if you've got the drive and the desire because you want to learn that really bad, then you'll go for it. And if, damn the obstacles, you'll head into it. So I think that was kind of that way with me. It just looked like that would really be something I could do and enjoy it for a long time. And again, even with the styles, doing things that are very cartoony as opposed to very illustrative, it keeps life really fresh, and it keeps me from getting bored. If I can, and that was one of the things I really looked at hard on. Oddly enough, was I mean, some things lend themselves to something cartoony because they're pretty funny. They're bizarre and weird, but they're kind of funny. So you can sort of go that way. But if you're dealing with an incredibly bizarre animal, you've got to tell that story accurately. You can't just futz around with it. It's got to be good.
Right.
So there's that. And again, I knew if this thing ever hit, and it did, so I had to produce. I wanted to do something that I wasn't going to get like just tediously bored with right away. And I never have. I still like doing it. I still like doing the research. I've got stacks of stuff I'm still going through.
Folks at home, we have the artist himself here from Five Senses Magazine. If you didn't know, Russ has a monthly comic strip called Stinkbug in the magazine. And I was wondering, A, where'd you come up with it? And B, is this a project that keeps you fresh, like you were just saying?
Okay. Yeah, the way I came up with that, I used to live out in Chino. I had kind of a little farm out there. And there were a lot of these, I think they're called biscotti beetles. I think that. You look it up. And I feel stupid that I would gum that up if that's wrong. But they're those black stink bugs. You have them all over Arizona.
Oh, yeah.
And they were all over the place out there. And I was always noticing that they were very diligent where they were going. If you pick one up and move it, he's going to go right back to, it's like, I'm sorry, places to go, people to see. So they're always very focused on what they're doing. But, at the same time, you've got this bug that's black in the Arizona sun. I mean, he can't really get away from that. And he's only got one thing going for him. He stinks. I mean, that's it. I mean, this poor schlub, whatever he does for a living, he's only got one thing, and it's got to cover everything. It's got to do it all for you. It's got to bring in the ladies, and it's got to defend you, and it's got to somehow help you make a living, and that's it, And so weirdly, I kind of related to that, I felt like, if there was ever like an immigrant animal that came in here and said, I don't know what to do, but I got this stink thing, is that anything? Can I work with that? Any openings? You know what I mean? That's sort of how I felt about him. And so I started drawing him up and sort of playing with gags. And then I thought, well, it only makes sense that his friend, which is Vinny, which is a vinegarone, which we also have all over Arizona, that's his deal too. He looks like he's dangerous, but that's the only thing going for him is he smells. That's it. So naturally they'd be buddies, and again, neither one of them really has a whole lot to offer. So they just they go to work and they go home, and and I'm relating to that. That's I know that guy.
Right.
So that's kind of how it came about. And again, it does stay fresh because. It's basically just observations of life every day. I mean, except from a bug's perspective, I guess. But I mean, I don't really even see him as a bug anymore. I mean, you have to fill his world with insects because that's where he lives. But it's sort of like if you watch Cars, I mean, cars can only go so far because everything's got to be a car. If you bring a plane in, then well, now we got that problem, And then if you have anything operating that, then it's gonna domino. So the bug thing, I think, is actually a little better encasement of what I'm trying to get across. I don't have to bring a lot of that in, but once in a while you have to have some kind of outside source for people to relate to, and obviously a bug is going to have to behave very human. He's going to have to be very human-like emotions, obviously, to get along and relate to the reader, hopefully. So I try not to ever like write down to like I'm writing to kids or whatever. It's sort of like Warner Brothers never wrote down. They're Bugs Bunny and Sylvester and all of them have their own, like, I know an adult like that. That is someone that lived down the block from us. That's someone I know. So I try to keep Stinkbug like that with characters that I actually sort of know or relate to. And that's probably really convoluted. What you asked.
Yeah, I asked for that. But I think it's good because, like, we do need social commentaries, and I'm a visual person. I like to see real life, whether it's in the movies or in comic books. So I feel you on that. Is there a particular storyline that people, if people haven't seen Stinkbug, can just follow, or is it just like one story after another?
He's had a few like series, like you'd have some series at work. I'm glad you brought that up because we're in the process of doing a Stinkbug comic book. Ba-boom!
Awesome.
Just roll right into that.
Right.
So what it's gonna have a lot of the ones that have appeared in Five Senses, and there's gonna be some bridge stories, some backstories of how these people got here. I think Stinkbug came over on a boat full of potato bugs, I think, is how he got here. But, that was, things were dire. So, that's why these things happen, these bug migrations. So anyway, there's going to be some of that background. And you'll get little bits of, Stinkbug at work, Stinkbug at home, because he has a great home life. Difficult, but, he's got a good home life. And, how he is with his friends, which, we're like that. I mean, we're different when we're out with our buddies than we are at home or at work, hopefully.
Indeed, yeah.
So there's that, So anyway, we'll be working on a Stinkbug comic book pretty quick.
Nice. What's the timeline for the comic book?
This year, hopefully.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah, that's what we're shooting for. Yeah.
Sweet.
A breakout year.
Well, maybe we're going to have you on the show and do a segment with that when you release
cool.
the book.
I'd love to, yeah.
Okay. So we're running out of time, Russ, and so I guess you just stole my last question of, what are you currently working on?
Mm-hmm.
But talking about style as cartoonist, I do have to give you props for a sick mustache. Okay.
Oh, bless you.
And then if people don't know, you also play the bagpipe. So, and this is a selfish question for me. So I want to know, how did you get into the game of bagpiping?
That's a good question too. So you just full of them. The first time I ever saw live pipes was I was actually photographing the Rose Parade in Pasadena, California, and they had a live pipe band. When they fired up, the sensation that I got was very, I guess, electric. It like went right down my spine, and I thought, wow, I've never had that sensation before, and I wasn't really sure what that was about. So I had in the back of my mind, I kind of like to do that sometimes because it's such an odd instrument and such a totally unique sound. So many years later, I was at a Highland Games, and I was whining about I'd like to learn that or something, and my wife said, well, just there's a piper right there, go talk to him. Just go talk to him. So I walked up to this gal who just happened to be local. It just happened to be one who taught piping, and I said, do you take on, like older people? And she goes, yeah, sure, that's fine. She said, I'll warn you that it's difficult, and we have a small survival rate, get into it, but if you're really interested. And again, it was one of those things, kind of like the cartooning. How bad do you want to do it? And I clearly wanted to do it really bad. So that's kind of how that started. Plus, you start looking at your own ancestral heritage, and a lot of these things start becoming, fairly clear. So you have a lot of Scots Irish, and a little Welsh thrown in there. The Stinkbug I see as being a lot Irish, But again, that's because he's my creation too. So there's that. But that's kind of how that started. And then once I got into it and started researching like the history of piping and the history of how that instrument was developed, along with the Gaelic languages, and they're really kind of interlocked in the history of that, then it started making a lot of sense. So it actually now has become kind of a point of pride with me.
Awesome. So it seems like your background has influenced not only your comics, but also your passion for the bagpipes, and that's great, Russ.
Sure.
And thank you for coming onto our show. Where can our audience find more information about you?
That's a good question. Facebook, there's a Russ Miller's, oddly enough, Facebook page, which has got a lot of the ones that I just. So if you just bored out of your mind and you want to just look at trivia, there's that. There's going to be an upcoming web page soon, and I'm not sure exactly how that's going to look yet, but there is one coming up that's going to be kind of dedicated to that sort of thing. Also, keep a lookout for an oddly enough book, because we're putting together one right now. As a matter of fact, my studio is just awash in oddly material right now. So we're working on that, as well as the Stinkbugs. So those are going to be coming up pretty quick. And obviously, it's in the Five Senses magazine. So
wow, you are a busy man, Russ.
It's good to be busy.
Yeah, I agree. I don't like doing anything. Sorry, I agree because I can't find. I agree because I can't be bored as well or talk. Well, Russ, thanks for your time.
Absolutely.
Here on the Five Senses webcast. Check out Russ monthly on Five Senses magazine with Stinkbug. And for more information about Five Senses, log on to 5enses.mag.com and like us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.